There is a hidden epidemic that all Americans need to wake up to. Crimes against children, whether physical, sexual, or psychological. Here is a sizable list of prominent Democratic and Republican politicians, lawyers, donors, and activists who have been publicly exposed or convicted for sexual crimes involving children. Sadly, these are only the ones who have been caught. Let's take a look at Democrats. Democratic donor and billionaire Jeffrey Epstein ran an underage child sex brothel and was convicted of soliciting underage girls for prostitution. Democratic New York Congressman Anthony Weiner pled guilty to transferring obscene material to a minor as part of a plea agreement for sexting and sending Twitter DMs to underage girls as young as 15. Democratic donor, activist, and Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein was criminally prosecuted and civilly sued for years of sexual abuse that was a well-known secret in Hollywood, including underage sexual activities with aspiring female actresses. He was convicted in 2020 for rape in the third degree and sentenced to 23 years in prison. Democratic activist and Me Too proponent Asia Argento settled a lawsuit for sexual harassment stemming from sexual activities with an underage actor. Democratic Mayor of Racine, Wisconsin, Gary Becker was convicted of attempted child seduction, child pornography, and other child sex crimes. Democratic Seattle Mayor Ed Murray resigned after multiple accusations of child sexual abuse were levied against him, including by family members. Democratic activist and aide to New York City Mayor de Blasio, Jacob Schwartz, was arrested on possession of 3,000-plus child pornographic images. Democratic activist and actor Russell Simmons was sued based on an allegation of sexual assault where he coerced an underage model for sex. Democratic Governor of Oregon Neil Goldschmidt, after being caught by a newspaper publicly, admitted to having a past sexual relationship with a 13-year-old girl after the statute of limitation on the rape charges had expired. Democratic Illinois Congressman Mel Reynolds resigned from Congress after he was convicted of statutory rape of a 16-year-old campaign volunteer. Democratic New York Congressman Fred Richmond was arrested in Washington, D.C. for soliciting sex from a 16-year-old boy. Democratic activist, donor, and director Roman Polanski fled the country after pleading guilty to statutory rape of a 13-year-old girl. Democrats and Hollywood actors still defend him to this day, including Whoopi Goldberg, Martin Scorsese, Woody Allen, David Lynch, Wim Wenders, Pedro Almodovar, Tilda Swinton, and Monica Bellucci. Democratic State Senator from Alaska George Jacko was found guilty of sexual harassment of an underage legislative page. Democratic State Representative candidate for Colorado Andrew Myers was convicted for possession of child pornography and enticing children. Democratic Illinois Congressman Gus Savage was investigated by the Democrat-controlled House Committee on Ethics for attempting to rape an underage female Peace Corps volunteer in Zaire. The committee concluded that while the events did occur, his apology was sufficient and took no further action. Democratic activist, donor, and spokesperson for Subway Jared Fogle was convicted of distribution and receipt of child pornography and traveling to engage in illicit sexual conduct with a minor. Democratic State Department official Carl Carey, under Hillary Clinton's State Department, was arrested on 10 counts of child porn possession. Democratic Maine Assistant Attorney General James Cameron was sentenced to just over 15 years in federal prison for 7 counts of child porn possession, receipt, and transmission. Democratic State Department official Daniel Rosen, under Hillary Clinton's State Department, was arrested and charged with allegedly soliciting sex from a minor over the internet. Democratic State Department official James Cafferty pled guilty to 1 count of transportation of child pornography. Democratic radio host Bernie Ward pled guilty to 1 count of sending child pornography over the internet. Democratic Deputy Attorney General from California Raymond Liddy was arrested for possession of child pornography. Democratic Illinois State Representative Keith Farnham resigned, was charged with possession of child pornography, and has been accused of bragging at an online site about sexually molesting a 6-year-old girl. Democratic spokesperson for the Arkansas Democratic Party, Harold Moody Jr., was charged with distribution and possession of child pornography. Democratic Radnor Township Board of Commissioners member Philip R. resigned from his position after being charged with possession of child pornography and abusing children between 2 and 6 years old. Democratic activist and BLM organizer Charles Wade was arrested and charged with human trafficking and underage prostitution. Democratic Texas attorney and activist Mark Benavidez was charged with having sex with a minor, inducing a child under 18 to have sex, and compelling prostitution of at least 9 legal clients in possession of child pornography. He was found guilty on 6 counts of sex trafficking. Democratic Virginia delegate Joseph Morrissey was indicted on charges connected to his relationship with a 17-year-old girl and was charged with supervisory indecent liberties with a minor, electronic solicitation of a minor, possession of child pornography, and distribution of child pornography. Democratic Massachusetts Congressman Jerry Studs was censored by the House of Representatives after he admitted to an inappropriate relationship with a 17-year-old page. Democratic former mayor of Stillwater, New York, Ricky Nelson, pled guilty to 5 counts of possession of child pornography of children less than 16 years of age. Democratic mayor of Clayton, New York, Dale Kenyon, was indicted for sexual acts against a teenager. Democratic mayor of Hubbard, Ohio, Richard Keenan, was given a life sentence in prison for raping a 4-year-old girl after claiming she initiated it. Democratic mayor of Winston, Oregon, Kenneth Barrett was arrested for setting up a meeting to have sex with a 14-year-old girl who turned out to be a police officer. Democratic Mayor of Randolph, Nebraska, Dwayne L. Shutt, was arrested and charged with 4 counts of felony third-degree sexual assault of a child and 1 count of intentional child abuse. Democratic Mayor of Stockton, California, Anthony Silva, was charged with providing alcohol to young adults during a game of strip poker that included a 16-year-old boy at a camp for underprivileged children run by the mayor. Democratic Mayor of Millbrook, New York, Donald H. Briggs, was arrested and charged with inappropriate sexual contact with a person younger than 17. Democratic Party leader for Victoria County, Texas, Stephen Jabor, pled guilty to possession and receiving over 500,000 child pornographic images. Democratic activist and fundraiser Terrence Patrick Beam was arrested on charges of sodomy and sex abuse in a case involving a 15-year-old boy, but when the alleged victim declined to testify, the judge dismissed the case. Democratic Party chairman for Davidson County, Tennessee, Rodney Clell Mullins, resigned amid child pornography allegations in 2005. Subsequently, he was arrested and convicted for possession and distribution of child pornography. Democratic activist Andrew Douglas Reed pled guilty to multiple counts of second-degree sexual exploitation of a minor for producing child pornography. Democratic official from Terre Haute, Indiana, David J. Roberts, was sentenced to federal prison for producing and possessing child pornography, including placing hidden cameras in the bedrooms and bathrooms at a home he shared with 2 minor female victims. Democratic Mayor of Dawson, Georgia, Christopher Wright, was indicted on the charges of aggravated child molestation, aggravated sodomy, rape, child molestation, and statutory rape of an 11-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. Democratic aide to Senator Barbara Boxer, Jeff Rosado, pled guilty to charges of trading in child pornography. Now let's take a look at Republicans. Republican and Defense Secretary of the United States Donald Rumsfeld was reported and investigated for authorizing the rape and torture of children in Iraqi prison Abu Ghraib. In 2004, he publicly accepted full responsibility for all acts committed during his tenure from 1975 to 1977, although no charges were pursued. Renowned serial killer, Crime Prevention Advisory Committeeman, and chairman of the Washington State Republican Party, Ted Bundy, was sentenced to death row for the abduction, rape, and murder of 30 young women and underage girls. He was given the electric chair on January 24, 1989. Republican chairman of Donald Trump's presidential campaign in Kentucky, Tim Nolan, pled guilty to child sex trafficking, and on February 11, 2018, he was sentenced to serve 20 years in prison. Republican former Oklahoma State Senator Ralph Allen Lee Shorty was indicted on 4 counts of human trafficking and child pornography. In November 2017, he pled guilty to 1 count of child sex trafficking in exchange for dropping of the other charges. Republican anti-abortion activist Howard Scott Heldreth is a convicted child rapist in Florida. Republican Constable Larry Dale Floyd of Denton, Texas, was arrested on suspicion of soliciting sex from an 8-year-old girl. Republican Judge Mark Pazahanich pled no contest to fondling a 10-year-old girl and was sentenced to 10 years probation. Republican Party leader Bobby Stumbo was arrested for having sex with a 5-year-old boy. Republican Councilman John Collins pled guilty to sexually molesting 13 and 14-year-old girls. Republican campaign worker Mark Scheidensticker is a convicted child molester from Concord in Maine. Republican Mayor of Waterbury, Connecticut, Philip Giordano, is serving a 37-year sentence in federal prison for sexually abusing 8 to 10-year-old girls. Republican Mayor of Oswego, New York, John Gosick, was sentenced to prison for soliciting sex from 2 15-year-old girls. Republican Ohio County Commissioner David Swartz pled guilty to molesting 2 girls under the age of 11 and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Republican legislator Edison Misla Alderando was sentenced to 10 years in prison for raping his daughter between the ages of 9 and 17. Republican Monroe County Committeeman John Curtin was charged with molesting a teenage boy. Republican Boy Scout leader, zoning supervisor, and serial killer Dennis Lynn Rader pled guilty for performing a sexual act on an 11-year-old girl he murdered. Republican anti-abortion activist Nicholas Morency pled guilty to possessing child pornography on his computer and offering a bounty to anybody who murders an abortion doctor. Republican campaign consultant from Los Angeles, California, Tom Shortride, was sentenced to 3 years probation for taking nude photographs of a 15-year-old girl. Republican senator from South Carolina and notable racist Strom Thurmond had sex with a 15-year-old black girl which produced a child. Republican pastor from whom George Bush commended during his 2004 presidential campaign, Mike Hintz, surrendered to police after admitting to a sexual affair with a female juvenile. Republican legislator from Stonington, Connecticut, Peter N. Dibble, pled no contest to having an inappropriate relationship with an underage girl from ages 10 to 13. Republican advertising consultant Carrie Lee Kramer, who appeared in an ad blasting Al Gore, was convicted for molesting his 9-year-old stepdaughter in Tucson, Arizona. Republican activist from Omaha, Nebraska, Lawrence E. King Jr., organized child sex parties at the White House during the 1980s. Republican lobbyist, journalist, and socialite Craig Spence committed suicide in 1989 in the wake of a Washington Times expose reporting on his involvement in a prostitution ring and in blackmail involving underage boys. Republican Congressman Donald Lukens was found guilty of having sex with a female minor and sentenced to 1 month in jail. Republican fundraiser Richard A. Delgadio was found guilty of child porn charges and paying 2 teenage girls to pose for sexual photos in Baltimore, Maryland. Republican activist Mark A. Grethen was convicted on 6 counts of sex crimes involving children. Grethen was found dead in his cell in August 2021 due to an apparent homicide by his cellmate at Lawrenceville Correctional Center. Republican activist Randall David Ankeny pled guilty to attempted sexual assault on a child in Larimer County, Colorado. Republican Congressman Daniel Beaver Crane had sex with a female minor working as a congressional page. Republican activist and Christian Coalition leader Beverly Russell admitted to an incestuous relationship with his stepdaughter. Republican judge for the Orange County, California Superior Court, Ronald Klein, was placed under house arrest for child molestation. Republican Congressman and anti-gay activist Robert Bowman was charged with having sex with a 16-year-old boy he picked up at a gay bar. Republican Sparta, New Jersey Committeeman Chairman and attorney Jeffrey Patty was arrested for distributing a video clip of a 5-year-old girl being raped. He currently runs a law firm called Patty & Patty. Republican activist Marty Glickman, aka Republican Marty, was taken into custody by Florida police on 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with an underage girl and 1 count of delivering the drug LSD. Republican legislative aide from Los Angeles, California, Howard L. Brooks, was charged with molesting a 12-year-old boy in possession of child pornography. Republican Senate candidate in Maine John W. Hathaway was accused of having sex with his 12-year-old babysitter and withdrew his candidacy after the allegations were reported in the media. Republican preacher Stephen C. White, who demanded a return to traditional values, was sentenced to prison after offering $20 to a 14-year-old boy from Philadelphia for permission to perform oral sex on him. Republican talk show host John Matthews pled guilty to exposing his genitals to an 11-year-old girl. Republican anti-gay activist Earl Butch Kimmerling was sentenced to 40 years in prison for molesting an 8-year-old girl after he attempted to stop a gay couple from adopting her. Republican Election Board official from St. Louis, Missouri, Kevin Cohen, was sentenced to 2 years probation for soliciting sex over the internet from a 14-year-old girl. Republican politician and activist from Missouri, Andrew Burr, was charged with 2 counts of first-degree sodomy with a 14-year-old boy in St. Louis. Republican politician and businessman Keith Westmoreland was arrested on 7 felony counts of lewd and lascivious exhibition to girls under the age of 16, i.e., exposing himself to children. Republican anti-abortion activist John Allen Burt was charged with sexual misconduct involving a 15-year-old girl. Republican county councilman in Hawaii, Keola Childs, pled guilty to molesting a male child. Republican activist John Butler was charged with criminal sexual assault on a teenage girl. Republican candidate from Clark County, Nevada, Richard Gardner, admitted to molesting his 2 California-born daughters in 1988. Republican councilman and former Marine from Illinois, Jack W. Gardner, was convicted of molesting a 13-year-old girl. Republican County Commissioner Merrill Robert Barter pled guilty to unlawful sexual contact and assault on a teenage boy. Republican City Councilman Fred C. Smelter Jr. pled no contest to raping a 15-year-old girl and served 6 months in prison. Republican activist from Virginia and Missouri, Parker J. Bana, pled guilty to possession of child pornography on his home computer and was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison and fined $18,000. According to online obituary information, he died on August 5, 2023. Republican Parole Board officer and former Colorado State Representative Larry Jack Schwartz was fired after child pornography was found in his possession. Republican strategist and Citadel Military College graduate Robin W. Vanderwall was convicted in Virginia on 5 counts of soliciting sex from boys and girls over the internet. He currently works for an organization called NARSOL, National Association for Rational Sexual Offense Laws. Republican businessman John Reeder Grunseth withdrew his candidacy for Minnesota governor after allegations surfaced that he went swimming in the nude with 4 underage girls, including his daughter. Republican director of the Young Republican Federation from Bakersfield, California, Nicholas Elizondo, molested his 6-year-old daughter and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Republican former president of New York City Housing Development, Russell Harding, pled guilty to possession of child pornography on his computer. Republican activist from Georgia and former president of Southeastern Legal Foundation, Matthew Glavin, was caught masturbating in public and fondling an undercover park ranger. Republican Party leader of Thurston County, Washington, and the chief civil deputy of the Sheriff's Department, Washington, pled guilty to 6 counts of raping his daughter and satanic rituals and served 14 years in federal prison. Republican benefactor of conservative Christian groups and Kalispell, Montana businessman Richard A. Daston Sr. was convicted on 6 counts of prostitution, sexual abuse of children, and promotion of prostitution. Republican City Councilman Mark Harris, who was described as a good military man and churchgoer, was convicted of repeatedly having sex with an 11-year-old girl and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Republican and former alumni relations manager at the University of Pittsburgh Johnstown, William A. Gillen, was sentenced to 2 years in prison for sexually abusing a teenage boy in order to pay $11,200. Republican owner of the now-closed B&K Christian bookstore in Richland Township, Cambria County, Paul Skiles, was arrested alongside William Gillen and sentenced to 2 years in jail for sexually abusing a teenage boy. Republican Douglas County, Nebraska Election Commissioner Patrick McPherson was arrested for fondling a 17-year-old girl. Republican Congressman Mark Adam Foley resigned from Congress after sending sexually explicit emails to former male pages under the age of 18. Republican Speaker of the House John Dennis Hastert was indicted on federal charges of structuring bank withdrawals after prosecutors alleged Hastert had molested at least 4 boys as young as 14 and attempted to compensate his victims and subsequently concealed the transactions. Hastert eventually admitted that he sexually abused the boys, whom he had coached decades earlier, and was sentenced to 15 months in prison.